My father abused and kicked me out of my home. So I took everything. So not so fun story, but I've always wanted to share this one. I'm not going to drag this out too long, but to get right to the point, my father is very religious to the point we couldn't do a lot of things that would be considered normal. Christmas, dating, etc. I didn't hate my dad by any means, he taught me a lot. However, he was very abusive. As a black man, he seemed to think the only way to discipline a child was to knock that sense into them. He would constantly get angry at minor things and punch my brother in the soft part of his stomach. I suppose we both just normalized that abuse, and as I got older, I learned to not take the punches and actually block. The first time I did it, shocked my dad. It was so satisfying not to cry when my dad hit me and just look at him with this blank expression. Doing this definitely made him more angry as he would try to make me cry. I feel like it gave him some sick satisfaction. You'd think all of this would make me hate him? Nope. My idiotic self just didn't seem to register how bad this was. I'd try to justify it as him teaching me a lesson. But eventually, the last straw would come. So, I was 16 at the time, and my father gave me this ultimatum: continue school or get a job and pay a majority of the bills. He wasn't working at the time and I hated school. While my grades were average to high, I just didn't want to be a part of that environment anymore. Our overall bill was about £1,300 and I'd have to give £600 of my paycheck, with my brother paying the other half. I decided to just go with it and look for a job. Now, a week into my job search, my father started shouting at me, saying I was taking way too long. Keep in mind, when my brother left school, he gave him over 2 months to find something. He ended up putting me in front of a computer and made me apply to things all day and night. I ended up going to bed at 6 a.m. the next morning. I got so desperate, I applied for McDonald's and within a day got the job. Unfortunately, it was one of the worst experiences of my life. A lot of inappropriate touching and horrible acquaintances. Anyway, a year into working, a new girl joined the team, and as cliché as it sounds, I fell for her instantly. I went out of my comfort zone and just decided to flirt with her. Within that day we were dating. It was amazing. Obviously, I couldn't tell me dad about this, so we hid it for another year as we dated. Within that time, we ended up having sex. Sex before marriage would be a big no-no. My father later found out. Now this part is pretty invasive. But he had connected to my WhatsApp messages and was reading them on his laptop while I slept. I believe he actually opened my phone while I slept, using my thumb recognition. I was chewed out the next morning and told to break up with her, which I didn't, because she was a whore and didn't really love me. He then told me to get out of the house and never come back. I will give some context for this. My dad likes to use this line when we're in trouble. He'll make us go outside our flat and then a minute later call us back inside. He had never really gotten to that point with me. But my brother experienced it all the time. I'd always told him that if our father ever did that to me, I'd just leave. So as you can imagine, I left. I walked for hours while my dad was blowing up my phone to come home. If you thought this was because he cared and wanted me to be safe, you'd be wrong. He would later send texts telling me not to tell anyone what was happening. It's none of their business and I'm not ruining his reputation. I wasn't planning on telling people anyway, but the fact he said that shows he only cares for others' opinions. Because I had left so quickly, I hadn't had time to grab anything. I had a phone and the clothes on my back. I had to call my girlfriend for moral support, and after talking, she straight away booked a hotel. I was so thankful. Lucky for me, I was getting paid the next day, so I'd be able to get my money and hopefully rent a place. To this day I haven't spoken to my father and I completely blocked him, and while I struggle to pay my rent every month, it's still way better than my situation prior. The story does have a happy ending. Remember how I wasn't able to get my stuff? Well, my father had gone on holiday. One of my friends tipped me to this, so My girlfriend and I went back to the house and broke in using a credit card. My dad never locked his door, so if you just swiped a card through the door with enough pressure, you could eventually make it turn and get in. I was actually struggling to do this, until the neighbor came by and actually did it for me. He was such a good guy. I know he just assumed we were locked out, but he really saved my life more than he knows. I took everything I wanted, including stuff like the TV. Since it was my money that paid for all of that, I can only imagine how shocked my dad was when he came home and found all my stuff gone. He was probably going to sell it to cover the rent.
Now to the comments. Of course, your dad wanted you to stay. You were paying half the rent. I'm so glad you were able to get out of that abusive situation.
My like to throw the get the duck out of my house, my roof my rules line, and when you leave, he would grab you and beat you for trying to leave. As I got older I learned to block and dodge the punches. The next time he threw the line at me, I grabbed my work bag, threw whatever clothes I could get my hands on and walked out while he was rampaging. Jumped into my car, which is the only car and I was the only one who knew how to drive so they could buy their groceries, and drove all the way to my GF that they never liked. I married said GF a couple weeks later. They found out from family and friends I had on FB about 1 month after I was married. I now have a beautiful little baby girl and got promoted at work and got pay raises and overcame some of my many anxieties and started progressing more than when I lived with my family. Edit. Wow, so many upvotes and rewards. Thanks everyone.
Sounds like you did pretty well from a bad situation. Man keeps that girl, she stayed with you at your worst, you don't find that everywhere.
OP replied. I'll never let her go.
Okay, that's the cutest thing I've heard all day, smiley. Your dad is a piece of shit.
OP replied. That's all I've ever wanted to hear.
Then hear it again, he's a piece of shit. Yeah, this resonates. My abusive mom kicked me out when I got pregnant and I told her, "K, but don't ever expect to see me or your grandbaby." I kept that promise. Sometimes it sucks to not have a parent to talk to, but I shudder to think what else she might have put me through if I'd let her.
Is the mill okay?
She's not much better. She lost the ability to spend time alone with my boys because she kept trying to take our oldest to the Kingdom Hall and indoctrinate him. She's a Jehovah's Witness and abused her own sons to the point that one of them committed suicide and the others have PTSD and a ton of other emotional issues. My stepmom ducking rocks, though. Hope your brother is okay too.
This.
Well done, friend. Your dad's a ducking monster, and you're much better off. 07.
Sorry, this just tickled me. It's been so long since I've seen the 07 salute and I love it. I always thought it was purely an EVE Online thing.
Elite Dangerous and Aces High also use 07, although Aces High usually uses the S salute instead. That seemed to be my dad's way of teaching me as well. I was about 15 when I learned to block dad's attack. Sadly, I don't personally remember the outcome of that, but according to my uncle, I broke my dad's wrist, 3 of his ribs and fractured his jaw. All I actually remember is the block, the world going black and waking up to it being dark outside, my mom asking where dad was. He ran half a state away to my uncle for 3 weeks. It's a huge red flag when there's drama and people say not to tell anyone. Secrets equals lies.
Yeah, means they're trying to hide their abuse.
My stepmother is a sociopath who has horrible impulse control and chronically lies. Anyone she tells me to not tell anything to, is someone she's lying about. Yo, your dad is a garbage excuse for a human being. Duck that mother ducker. You got this, grind on. I had a similar situation. When I was 16, my mother decided I was a drug addict, while in reality, I really only smoked a little weed, and had a few drinks. Thing was, my father was an alcoholic, so she was particularly sensitive. She had left him when I was around 2 years old, so I was an only child with a single mother. Granted, I was a little wild, preferring to stay out with friends and run away for days at a time to avoid the accusations and yelling. At 16, my mother told me to get out. I did. I got a job at a bike shop in a neighboring city that paid enough to rent a room in a roommate situation. This was totally doable back in the 1980s. I didn't look back for several years. Eventually, we reconnected, but to this day she feels as though it was the right move and that I was an addict. Side note, I was born with both clubbed feet, so I live in chronic pain. I have been on and off of opiates for many of my adult years. I go through cycles where I'd rather be high and pain-free, and other times I'd rather have my head and deal with pain. When it's time to stop, I just stop. There are never withdrawals, psychological cravings, backsliding. I simply stop. Therefore, I am fairly certain that I am not genetically predisposed to addiction.